Hey, I'm here with Jared. We're talking discipleship.
Yes.
Love the video where you were walking us through what discipleship is not and what it is, right? And so you had three main statements in there. You said it's not a moment, it's a movement. It is not behaving, it's beholding. It is not assimilation, it's replication. First of all, great job on the alliteration with all of those. That's
Thank you, sir.
Really
Someone else helped me with that.
So let's talk about these, and we'll just take them one at a time, and because I like to just let you kind of double click and go deeper on each one of them, and help us really understand what it's not, what it is, and really, honestly, how we can live kind of in the tension between the two, right? Because so we'll start with the first one. It's not a moment, it's a movement. We're not saying that there are no spiritual moments, because there are. I think what you're trying to help us understand is that we can't reduce discipleship to just the sum total of whatever spiritual moments are, right?
Yeah.
So unpack it for us a little bit. Take us a little bit deeper into your thought process.
Yeah. I think for youth leaders and for parents of our students, it's often tempting to think about, we boil down success in Christianity to moments. So when I grew up in church, it was, do they raise their hand at the salvation prayer, right?
Yeah.
And
I used to get bonus points in children's church if I raised my hands.
yeah, right. And so I've been in services, right? I've been at children's VBSs where it's like, hey, how many of you in this room would rather go to heaven where there's unlimited candy and it's Disney World, or how many of you want to go to hell where it smells like eggs and you're burning? And of course, every kid in the room's like, heaven, and then it's
someone's
like
counting every hand,
right,
and we're like,
we
did it.
300 salvations today, and listen, God does significantly regenerate people's hearts in a moment where they come to know Jesus. That absolutely happens in moments.
Yeah.
However, I think it's dangerous to base our success looking for the hand raise, or looking for, did the student cry at the altar, or those moments matter, and spiritual moments are important. They're like these flagpoles that go in our life, and oftentimes we can draw back to. But when we're thinking about discipleship, we have to understand it's really about a movement. It's about moving a student from not believing in the gospel at all in their life to full belief in the gospel, which never fully happens, right? That we spend our lives doing this.
Yeah.
But it's moving them through that journey. So it's not looking for the one-time moments, because those moments will happen, hopefully. Yeah. But we're focusing on moving them along the way, moving them onto the journey, which is a different perspective, and I think it's a way that changes our idea of success and failure.
You're really, from a theological perspective, you're really talking about the doctrine of sanctification, right? The process of us becoming more like Christ, and that's a moving process. It's a process of movement from going from I'm one as a complete unbeliever all the way to being a believer, and then after that, continuing that process to become more like Christ. That's what sanctification is.
Yeah,
right?
And I think the key is the way we become more like Christ is we believe more in Christ. So the more that we trust and treasure Jesus, our behavior starts to model that.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that next one then, because it kind of segues right in there. You said it's not behaving, it's beholding.
Yeah.
And so it would be logically easy to assume like, oh, I need to be like Jesus. Okay, I need to behave like him, so let me just exert great willpower and try to figure out how to live perfect, right?
Right. Or you could take that statement I made and say, okay, so you're saying it doesn't matter how I live.
You go the opposite extreme.
God's grace is sufficient, which we do here in students. And I think what I'm trying to say is this: our focus in youth ministry for many years, and when I say our, I mean America, the world, whatever. The focus in youth ministry has been, how do we get kids to look like Christians? And in church, I think, in general.
Sure.
And so, but with teens especially, because we go, we got to get them to stop wearing that, dressing like that, stop using that language.
Don't post that anymore.
Right. And there's a million things.
Sure.
And a lot of those things are sinful, and they're not Christ-like.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that it doesn't matter what they do or how they live or how they behave. I do think when you become a follower of Jesus more and more, it changes your behavior. But what I'm saying is our focus, if it's on behavior, we will miss the heart. But if it's on the heart, we'll never miss the behavior. And so we want to teach kids to love Jesus. I heard a story one time about, if you've got a kid running around and they're playing with a knife, How do you get that knife from them, right? Because you're like, what's going on? This is dangerous. Well, you got to offer them something better. That's the easiest way. So, hey, I've got a big lollipop. It's like, oh, who cares about that anymore? I've got this, right? And our hearts are kind of the same way. Is we can't just say, don't play with that bad thing or don't do that bad thing. When we offer something better, which is Jesus, we willingly lay those things down and pick up him. You know?
I love that. I think one of my encouragements to a lot of youth pastors on this particular point of it's not behaving, it's beholding, is that when we're discipling, when we're involved in spiritual conversations with students, when we are leading small groups with students, when we're even sharing a devotional or maybe a message or something, endeavor to apply Scripture to the root level, not the fruit level.
Yeah.
Right? Because what you're talking about, behaving-wise, that's the fruit. That should be the fruit. If the behavior's good,
right,
then it's the fruit of beholding well in your heart.
That's right.
Right? If the behavior's bad, then it indicates there's a deeper root issue that's going on. And I think sometimes we do in youth ministry, we can become very reactive to the behavior of a student.
That's right.
In both extremes. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I saw you worshiping. I saw you went up to the altar, and we're reactive, and we're assuming then that everything on the root is good.
That's
or we saw the post on a social feed and we're thinking like, oh, my goodness, right? So it's about the what our heart beholds here. So now let's hit this last one here.
Can I add one quick thing to that? Because I do think it's important also to remember when we're thinking about behaving, and we think about acting like Jesus. Sometimes we can teach students, or they have the perception that God's up there and he listed out this list of rules. Most of them are all kind of punishments for us, but to be a real Christian is to sacrifice what you really want to do, to live like him, and it's kind of this turmoil, But the reality is when you look at how Jesus has called us to live, and kind of these behaviors that God would say and the Bible would say, hey, when you live like this, you'll be blessed. What he's really doing is saying, I designed you. I made you. I know how you should function. And if you live the way that I'm called you to live, you will find the most joy, the most peace, the most fulfillment. So it's not a punishment. It's a blessing.
Yeah.
And who better to speak into how we should live than the one who created us and made us? And so I think that's important to frame that when we're talking to students as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's a great reminder to us, right? And a great reminder to students through us as adults.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jared, break down this your last point from that initial video on assimilation versus replication.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's easy. I think this is what you're saying, but I'm gonna give you a chance to kind of unpack a little bit more. It's easy to assume. I've assimilated students. They're coming to our youth ministry. They're showing up on a somewhat regular basis, right? They're showing up at church, right? And we got them. That's it, right? But you're saying discipleship is a whole lot deeper than that.
That's right. Yeah, it's easy to think activity and attendance equals maturity as a Christian.
Because we can see it.
We can see it.
We can measure it.
They're here.
Yeah.
They're here. They're part of it.
Yeah.
But discipleship is not just about getting them involved in church life and in church culture. Discipleship, at the end of the day, Jesus calls us to be a kingdom of priests. So that doesn't mean the pastor or the youth leader is the priest. That means we're discipling people to be priests, to be spiritual conduits of Jesus to their community and to the people around them. And so the ultimate sign of fruit in disciple making is, are they then going out and making disciples?
Is the disciple making disciples?
Right.
Is the disciple
it's
producing?
The replication. What God's done in me, he wants to do through me. And I think the mistake that we make oftentimes when we're talking to students is we think, we'll get to that when they're mature, when they're down the road.
Yeah.
But that is the heart of Christianity. You can't have Christianity without mission, without replication. And so we've got to start on the front end and how we measure what discipleship is, to go, if I'm not talking about from the very get-go, hey, to be a Christian is to love and to reach others, we're missing it.
Yeah. I always say, too, that, some of our greatest growth moments as Christians, both as adults and students, happen in that replication moment.
Yeah.
When a student is sharing their faith. When you're sharing your faith, I'm sharing my faith, right? Like, those are some of our greatest moments of spiritual growth.
That's right.
And so if we reduce discipleship and spiritual growth to just consume, learn another verse, attend another service, right?
Yeah.
Then we're missing half of the whole,
Yep.
the replication process that it's clearly laid out in the scriptures.
right.
Because that's what Jesus said in the
Yeah.
Great Commission, right? He said, go and make disciples of all men, right?
Yeah.
So
and it's messy. The whole thing is a messy
Oh,
process because
yeah.
you're picturing this now, right? You've now got students who you're not even sure if they're saved. They're not even sure. They're trying to live for Jesus. They're trying to share. So they're sharing Jesus with their friend.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you're like, dude,
Yeah.
I don't even where you at.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, like, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. In fact, maybe that's good when we're living out these principles and we're trying to look at. And again, let's go back to Jesus. How messy was it for him?
So messy.
He's got these disciples. He's like, all right, go out and do this. And these guys are constantly bumbling over themselves.
You got
every time
Peter, who's always opening his
Right.
big mouth. You got John, who's calling himself the beloved disciple. The rest of the
Right.
dudes are like, who do you think you are? You got the
Exactly.
mom who shows up saying, let my boy sit on your right and left. I mean, this is junior high drama at its best.
after 3 years, right before crucifixion, Peter's
Yeah.
denying him.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Peter's
idea
like, I'm
that,
done. I'm going back to being a fisherman. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's important to note they had already been sent out on mission, right?
Yeah.
So this whole thing is messy. This whole thing is not clean cutter. But if you're willing to understand these principles, put in the time and energy, love these students,
Yeah.
You may not see all the fruit you want to see in the moment, but long term, God can really do some powerful things.
And here's another way to look at even what you're mentioning with Jesus and his disciples. Some of Jesus' most powerful teaching moments came in response
That's right.
to the drama of the disciples,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so, first of all, I think you should feel encouraged as a youth leader, as a volunteer youth pastor, as a paid youth pastor, whatever your role is. You should feel encouraged
Yep.
that discipleship was messy even for Jesus.
That's right.
Right? So be encouraged by that. But then secondly, I would encourage you, Jared and I, both of us would encourage you to look at like the moments of mess and the moments of drama with your students and see them as a discipleship opportunity.
Yep.
Rather than like, oh, these kids, man, behaving all this way, doing all this stuff. I got to step in and fix this, fix this. Like you might be actually missing a great teaching opportunity and discipleship opportunity for your students.
Right. Yeah, and I'll just add this. I had the opportunity of being a youth pastor for 8 years and then becoming a young adult college pastor. And one of the amazing things is I had so many of my students who were youth then transition to being college students. And these kids that for years and years toiling, and I was full-time as my job and going, I don't think these kids are Christians at all. What am I doing? All of a sudden, when they started to turn 18, 19, 20, you saw them start to go, I think this is real for me. I got to live this out. And so it helped me realize that we are sowing seed and building foundation for things that may not happen in the moment.
Yeah.
However, it doesn't mean what you're doing doesn't matter and isn't important. Because you're building the foundation, you're sowing that seed that's going to reap a harvest. And maybe you'll never see it. Maybe you'll be privileged enough to see it. But what you're doing is important and it matters.
The greatest fruit of the work Jesus did with his disciples happened after he ascended.
Yeah.
Right? So be encouraged by that. Sometimes you and I are reaping a harvest, and if you are reaping a harvest, it's probably because someone else planted the seed.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Sometimes you and I are reaping a harvest, and someone else planted it. Sometimes we're sowing the seed, and we might, to your point, we might not see it, or someone else will see it. But that's all the journey of discipleship for all of us. So, Jared, thanks for taking a couple minutes. Sitting here in this video, just kind of unpacking those thoughts a little bit, helping us apply it to our lives and also apply it to the lives of our students.